大家好，上午好，很高兴跟你们见面。好，我觉得你们知道我是Lauren老师，过去比较教育研究院的老师，所以我觉得你们已经知道这个是我们的第7年在北是吧？所以非常荣幸，有这个机会参加Rima老师的会议，谢谢你们。So. Good morning, everyone. I think most of you all know that I'm coming from the Institute of Comparative Education, entering 7th year at BNU. I'm very honored to have this opportunity to be the discussant. And really thank you to Professor Rima for coming back to BNU, Professor Michael, one of their early China homes. And we first met Michael 11 years ago at the Paulo Freire Institute, UCLA. And we met Rima 6 years ago at a similar event. And that was when we had first arrived at BNU on a session also with Professor Zhang Lili. And both of you all have been great support to me for the last 6 years. Professor Zhang Lili in person and Professor Rima through Skype calls, emails, and ARA meetups. So I'm very humbled and honored to serve in this role. I also want to thank Dr. Liu Jing, doing many jobs, who is the director of this faculty's international office, and also it should be said she's an excellent scholar practitioner on the issues related to this talk. And in fact, it's because Professor Zhang Lili and the work with Professor Liu Jing and other colleagues here this morning that we do sexual health education in rural minority ethnic areas in China. So welcome to the team, my colleagues from that, and also to the BNU leadership on this invitation. Time has gone really quickly. I wrote down that I remember the 5th anniversary lectures as if they weren't that long ago. Often large faculties can be very siloed, and this is an important interdisciplinary space which crosses institutes, even faculties on campus, as the three of us do in our work, like many of you do in your work, despite, at least in my case, real pushback for really doing that, if we think of that word very seriously. The reason I find interdisciplinarity to be so important is it really helps us never take for granted the topics we're looking at, because we can see other ways that people might be looking at the same work. And so this is how I would like you to see the talk this morning. Perhaps the content is highly relevant to you, but perhaps just as relevant is this masterful, very vivid presentation of a phenomenon that shouldn't be taken for granted and that's going on all around us. So I want to just pull out a few themes for all of us to consider this morning, and also beyond the talk with each other, and offer any of them to Professor Apple for her thoughts before we open the spaces for your questions. These are very brief, but 6 categories. First, I will say my own positionality. I am the daughter of a feminist early childhood education public school teacher, and I got my copy of Our Bodies, Ourselves for Christmas, age 16, and then it resurfaced in very early women's studies departments courses as a text. The point I'm making here is that things that arrive for Christmas, you know, they're just not popular things that Professor Apple is showing on the screen, but they're studied very seriously, and perhaps they are too in classes at BNU. Now, my next theme is just a current significance of the why care about mothers. I'm thinking of all the ways that when Professor Apple is in the world, she is connecting this work to public health workers on the ground, addressing maternal and infant mortality and morbidity. Another connection to the significance is these highly problematic notions of quote-unquote acculturation. And the quote, if you were listening carefully, was notably from the 1930s and 1940s about following doctor's directions served to separate her generation from previous immigrant generations. It made them American and modern. So you have to read a lot of things through what was going on that slide. But again, I said 1930s and 1940s, and now we're looking at what's playing out in my country of citizenship. So it made me think about human rights abuses of infants and children separated right now from their parents on the US-Mexican border and placed without permission. So just really immediate connections of these notions of acculturation, of modernity, obviously highly racialized, highly problematic. The next current significance I pulled out was just in pop culture, pop news culture, on the overwhelming amount of current pop scientific mothering books in English and other languages, like the Time magazine, very important magazine, the Time magazine April 2019 article on a popular book by the Brown University economist Emily Oster, Crib Sheet. So there's really, if you think, if you came this morning, you're like, why care? Well, I mean, Time magazine has run essentially something validating that this work is highly relevant to mothers today, to my friend that gave birth like 2 weeks ago, to my sister that will give birth in the UAE in just a few months. And then another significance is China in 2019. I will not claim any expertise, but I just want to acknowledge and hold that there's a lot of strong feelings and experiences around this topic in the room around these issues, I think, about the good mother of having an additional child. All these things have played out in the last few years, which brings me to the next question that you've touched on. But I think just to recognize, again, how do you find discussing questions like the one I'm asking shift when you present this in different disciplines and in different parts of the world, as you and I discussed before you arrived, that would likely happen. Another theme of intersectionalities that you bring up very well, but I just want to keep on everyone's mind about intersectional mothering, fathering, and parenting, beyond some of the identifiers you've discussed, including class, race, age, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, the heteronormativity stuff, migration, ability, faith, and family structure. And maybe I'm interested in other invisible parenting issues that there just wasn't room in the paper for. My second to last category, people always like to hear when you're going to end, is new materialisms. I thought it was very interesting in the paper about interactions with developments in domestic technology, which are spreading around the globe, like electricity, plumbing, the stove, the refrigerator, washing machine. And that stuck out to me in terms of those of us who work on new materialisms. And finally, around futures, future thinking in this field, or these fields that you would position yourself as doing the research in. I'm interested if you can tell us about other emerging scholars in these fields that are keeping the work going. Maybe you mentor them, or where you imagine this field could be headed in the next 5 years. Thank you.